So in the structural organization of animals, we have studied about the animal tissues, then life history of earthworm. So now we shall be studying about the life history of frog. So frog is an amphibian which belongs to class Amphibia in phylum Chordata. So the body is divided into head and neck and trunk. So the head consists of a pair of eyes and a pair of nostrils and a mouth with well developed jaws. So the eyes are covered by or protected by a nictitating membrane which helps when the frog is underwater, so that the water does not enter into the eyes and the microorganisms will not be infecting the parts of the eye. So that is the function of the nictitating membrane when the frog is underwater. And in addition to that, there is a tympanic membrane present just on either side of the eyes, which functions like the ear. It receives the sound signals that is present in the frog, which is a not well developed ear, but however it helps in the receiving the sound signals when the frog is receiving any sound. And the trunk has a pair of two pairs of limbs, one pair of forelimbs and one pair of hind limbs. So the forelimbs are each forelimb is having 4 digits, and the hind limb is having 5 digits. These digits are webbed, so that means there is webbed feet. So the webbed feet helps in swimming when the frog is underwater. Now these are some external features, or we can say the morphology of the frog. Now in addition to this, the male and female frogs can be differentiated on the basis of some external features. In the case of male frog, there is a structure called as nuptial pad just near the first digit of the forelimb. So in the forelimbs, the first digit is having a nuptial pad which helps in the fertilization or when the frog is under copulation. That is seen in male frog. And there is another important characteristics in male frog, a pair of the vocal cords. So vocal cords are present in the male frog. So that is why the croaking sound which is produced by the frog is from the male frog. So we hear the croaking sound during the rainy season particularly, and this croaking sound is from the male frogs only. So this croaking sound is not for any purpose. It only calls for the female frog to lay the eggs for fertilization. So when the male frog is completely well developed, so the male reproductive system produces the sperms or the male gametes. So when it want to release the sperms, so externally into the water, so it will attract the female frog by croaking sound, so that the eggs are laid near the sperms and there is a successful fertilization brought about in the water. That is the external features of the frog. So the frog's body is slimy and moist when we see the external. So there are no scales as in case of fish and as in case of reptiles. So in fish we come across scales that protect the body. In reptiles also there are dry scales which are called as scutes, but such kind of any type of scales are absent in the case of amphibians. So the body is particularly this frog, which is scientifically called as Rana tigrina. That is the scientific name of a frog. So in this genus species, there is no scales found. The body is slimy, smooth, and it is somewhat moist, which helps in the respiration. That is the external features of frog. Now coming to the various systems like digestive system, circulatory system, excretory system, and nervous system and reproductive system. So when we see the reproductive system, it consists of the alimentary canal starting from the mouth to the cloacal aperture. So the mouth is well developed because there is a pair of well developed jaws, as it is a vertebrate, so the jaws are strong, and also there are minute teeth inside the jaws, and there is a tongue, flexible tongue, producing this saliva is also produced in the buccal cavity. So the mouth contains the buccal cavity. The buccal cavity continues into a short pharynx, and the pharynx continues into a narrow tube called as the esophagus. So before the esophagus you find the pharynx, and there is the buccal cavity that is present in between the two jaws. Now the esophagus, which is a narrow short tube, it opens or it continues into a sac-like muscular stomach. So the stomach is muscular, and where the food is digested. So however, we are not studying the process of digestion, just only the mentioning the parts of the digestive system. So the stomach contains the gastric juice, and then the digestion also takes place here. So this stomach continues into the ileum or the intestine. So where the separation of the small intestine and the ileum is at a small constriction called as the pylorus. So where there is a pyloric sphincter inside, which regulates the flow of the food particles from the stomach to the intestine or the ileum. Now the ileum or this intestine is also connected with the liver and pancreas. So the liver is the organ which produces the bile juice, and this bile juice is stored in the gallbladder. So the this bile juice is transported by the cystic ducts. The gallbladder and the liver are connected by short and branched cystic ducts. So the bile juice which is produced by the liver does not directly flow into the intestine. It is stored in the gallbladder, and that is transported by the cystic ducts, and from the gallbladder by the help of a bile duct, the bile juice is carried to the intestine or the ileum, that is the liver. Similarly, the pancreas is also just by the side of the liver. The pancreas also secrete the pancreatic juice, which is carried by the pancreatic duct that opens into the ileum or the intestine. So like that, the digestion also takes place in the ileum. So the ileum continues into and opens into a sac-like structure called as rectum. Now this rectum opens outside by the cloacal aperture. Now this is not called as the anus, because so when there is a separate opening for the rectum, we refer it as anus. But here actually what happens, the opening of the urinary bladder, the opening of the ureters, all takes place in the this chamber called as the cloacal chamber, and that is why this is a common aperture for the movement of all these the reproductive structures, the products of the reproductive system, then also the undigested food material, and also the urine which is produced by the kidneys. So the ureters also open in this chamber, the urinary bladder also open into this chamber, and even in case of female reproductive system, the oviducts also open into the same chamber. So that is why it is a common chamber. That is hence it is not referred as anus. So it is called as cloacal chamber. That is the digestive system of the frog. Then we are not supposed to study the process of digestion. So briefly these are the parts of the digestive system. Then briefly about the heart or the circulatory system, or before that some organs of respiratory system. So though we are not studying the diagrams of the respiratory system and even the circulatory system, just to mention about the respiratory system, respiration takes place by skin and also it takes place by water. And when the frog is underwater, the skin helps in respiration. Now the skin is moist when it is on land. Now the skin is capable to absorb the dissolved oxygen because of abundant capillaries. So the surface of the skin is supplied or is provided with abundant capillary branches. Hence the frog, when it is in contact with water, the skin is capable to absorb the oxygen. So suppose when we compare the human being, when we are underwater, we are not able to absorb the oxygen because our skin is not supplied rich blood capillaries as that of the frog. Hence the frog is capable of absorption of dissolved oxygen in the water. So that is cutaneous respiration which takes place through the skin. Now when the frog is on land, where the nostrils means breathing takes place, there is a pair of lungs inside and there is exchange of gases in the lungs, and that is pulmonary respiration as in case of human being. So that is when the frog is on land. So these are the two types of respiration when the frog is underwater, the cutaneous respiration, and when it is on land, the pulmonary respiration. And sometimes we also come across certain respiration also takes place in the buccal cavity. So when the lungs are not functioning there, so that is called as buccopharyngeal respiration. The buccal cavity, a part of the pharynx, helps in the absorption of the oxygen. That is however less in occurrence, but most common is cutaneous and pulmonary respiration. So that is about the respiration. Then when we come to the circulatory system of the frog, so the heart is surrounded by the pericardial membrane, and it is made up of 3 chambers here. So the heart is muscular. The wall of the heart is made up of muscles, same as that of the human being. Also the cover, the protective cover is the pericardial membrane or the pericardium, and the circulatory system constitutes the heart blood vessels, and so these blood vessels and the blood, they involve in the circulation system of frog. The heart is made up of 3 chambers, 2 auricles and 1 ventricle. So the just by the side of the auricles there is another chamber which is called as the sinus venosus. So this triangle shaped chamber, which is just near the right auricle or the right atrium. So auricles are also referred as the atria. So that sinus venosus receives blood from different parts of the body, and then it will send it to the ventricle, and from the ventricle it is carried to the lungs, and from the lungs it comes back to the heart. But however here there is also another chamber called as conus arteriosus. So that means the ventricle opens into a short or a small sac-like structure called as conus arteriosus. So here when we see the circulation system of the frog, there is mixing of the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood. So because there are no 4 chambers, when we compare to the human circulatory system, we are having 2 auricles, 2 ventricles. So the there is no mixing of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood because of the 4 chambers. Now as there are only 3 chambers, so in the ventricle the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood both are mixed up, and that is why pure oxygenated blood is not supplied to the parts of the body. Hence it is called as incomplete blood circulation in case of frog. So that is just a brief explanation of the heart. And in the frog there is a system called as hepatic portal system, one more system associated with the circulatory system. So this hepatic portal system, it is a specialized connection of veins between the liver and the intestine. So the liver and the intestine is connected by a specialized branch of veins connections which constitutes the hepatic portal system. Hepatic means liver, so the portal means it is carried to the intestine. That is one separate part which we come across in this region. Now there is one more system called as the lymphatic system associated with this. So this lymphatic system consists of the lymph channels and the lymph nodes. So lymph is a fluid which is almost like blood but without RBC and the few proteins. Now usually in blood we are having RBC, WBC, platelets and various types of proteins. Now when the same blood is separated without RBC and certain proteins, we call that fluid as lymph. So there is also a lymphatic system in frog, and it includes the lymph channels and also the lymph nodes. This is about a brief explanation of the circulatory system of frog. Now when we come to the excretory system, there is a pair of kidneys in the frog which are the excretory organs. So these kidneys contain the nephrons or uriniferous tubules and the ureter and the urinary bladder. So the kidneys which are made up of nephrons or urinary tubules, uriniferous tubules. So these produce the urine, and that is carried by the ureters. But in the case of male, it is called as the urinogenital duct, and that is carried and stored in the urinary bladder, and where it is released into the cloaca, and also then externally it is released by the cloacal aperture. That is about the excretory system of frog. Then when we see the nervous system, so the nervous system constitutes the brain or the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and autonomous nervous system, similar to the human being. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and whereas the peripheral nervous system constitutes the cranial nerves which are originating from the brain, and also the spinal nerves which are originating from the spinal cord. So here there are 10 pairs of cranial nerves which are originating from the brain, and 10 pairs of spinal nerves which are originating from the spinal cord. But when we see in the human being, when we compare, there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves and there are about 31 pairs of spinal nerves in case of human being. And the autonomous nervous system, which is a part of the peripheral nervous system, constitutes the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So this parasympathetic and sympathetic, so one of the system increases an activity and another decreases an activity. Now suppose whenever in case of take the blood circulation or the beating of the heart or any the activities in the body, so they are increased by the parasympathetic nervous system. In the reproductive system, so we can differentiate the male and female frogs separately. That means they are unisexual. So the male and female, when we study the reproductive system, now the reproductive systems are always associated with the excretory system. That means the testis and ovary, they are in connection or they are attached with the kidneys. So that is why usually the reproductive system is referred as the urinogenital system. So urino means excretory, genital means reproductive. So hence the reproductive system and excretory system, as they are associated with each other, hence they are referred as urinogenital system. Now one by one we shall see what are the parts in the male and then we shall see in the female. So the kidneys, which are elongated flat structures, so these are in pairs which are present in the lower part of the abdominal cavity. Now from each kidney, that means on the anterior part of the kidney, there are some finger-like branched structures called as the fat bodies. So in both the male and female we come across these fat bodies. They are not associated with reproductive system, but however there are some accessory structures present on the anterior part of the kidneys, so they are called as the fat bodies. Now just near the fat body, that is again on the anterior dorsal part of the kidneys, there is the testis. On each kidney there is a testis which is found on the kidneys. Now each testis gives rise to small tube-like structures. So these small tube-like structures are called as vas efferents. So vas efferents, they are the minute tube-like structures which originate from the testis and open into the kidney. That means the male gametes or the sperms which are produced by the testis, they pass through the vas efferents and enter into the kidney, and along with the urine, those the sperms are carried through the ureter. So that is why the ureter in the case of male frog, it is referred as the urinogenital duct. So here the urine also is carried by the ureter or by this duct. The sperms are also passed through the same duct. That is why urinogenital duct. Then the vas efferents which opens into the kidneys. Now further there is another canal which is opening into the ureter. So that is called as the Bidder's canal. So there is one more canal which is present inside, and that is called as the Bidder's canal, which we cannot show in the diagram because it is inside the kidneys. So the Bidder's canal is the common canal which is opening into the this ureter, means which carries the urine as well as the sperms or the male gametes which are produced by the testis. So then again we are also having an adrenal gland here on the kidney, but however this adrenal gland is independent. It is not associated with the excretory or the reproductive system. It is a gland which secretes the hormones there, and we are not concerned with that part. But when we draw the kidney, we find that structure on its surface. So the ureters in the case of a male is referred as the urinogenital duct. So these two open into the cloaca. So that means the urine and the sperms, they are carried by the urinogenital duct and they are released into the chamber called as the cloaca. So the rectum also, the ileum or the intestine also opens into the cloaca, and at the same time here the urine which is released, it is stored in the urinary bladder, and that also opens into the cloaca. So all such openings are seen in this chamber, hence that is called as the cloacal chamber, and the opening of the cloacal chamber to the exterior is called as the cloacal aperture. That is the in the case of male reproductive system or the male urinogenital duct. Now if you come to the female, in the female frog, as there are no vocal sacs, there is no croaking sound in that frog, and there is no presence of the nuptial pad, which are the external features of the male frog. So in female we see the absence of these structures, and here the female reproductive organs are the ovaries, which are also present on the kidneys just like the testis. But the ovaries are not they are in attachment with the kidneys, but there is no any connection between the ovary and the kidneys. So that is the only difference between the male and the female frog. But in the male, the testis is connected to the kidneys by the help of vas efferents, so that the sperms which are produced, they enter into the kidneys. But in the ovary, just they are attached by the help of a membrane called as the mesorchium. So this mesorchium, which is present on the surface of the ovary, so that helps in attachment to the kidneys. There is no any connection between the kidney and the ovary. So similarly, there are two ovaries here, and as usual, the kidneys are having the fat bodies and the adrenal organ or the adrenal gland. Then the ureters originate from the kidneys, and they carry the urine which is released into the cloaca. And there is a pair of oviducts on the lateral sides of the kidney. So this anterior part of the oviduct is long and coiled and narrow, slender, and this oviduct is having a funnel-like structure at the anterior end, which is open. So that is called as the oviducal funnel. So the oviducal funnel continues into the coiled oviduct, and this oviduct, before it opens into the cloaca by the help of the opening, there is a small swollen structure called as the ovisac. Actually this is called as the ovisac. So this ovisac is a broad part of the oviduct at the posterior end, just before when it opens into the cloacal chamber. So the two ovisacs, they join and form a common single opening there into the cloacal chamber. So these are the parts of the, as usual there is the urinary bladder, and that is the female urinogenital system. But however here the ureter does not carry the female gametes, and hence we can refer this as the ureter. But here the ureter, along with that, it carries the sperms, hence it is urinogenital duct. But here it is not urinogenital duct because it is purely transporting the urine. That is the female reproductive system. Now when the sperms are produced, they are released by the male frog into the water. So already we mentioned the croaking sound which attracts the female frog. So the male frog will release the sperms into the water. So fertilization is external. So sperms are released into the water in a safe and warm place, and the female frog also releases the eggs. Here the eggs which are produced by the ovary, these eggs are released by the ovary and they enter into the oviducal funnel. So the from the oviducal funnel, the eggs pass into the oviduct and ovisac, and then they are released through the cloaca. So similarly the female also releases large number of eggs at a time. So usually 2000 to 3000 eggs are released by one female frog at maturity. So these large number of eggs which are minute, they are released into the water, where the male frog also has released the sperms, and fertilization takes place in the water there. And after fertilization, what happens? The zygote which is formed, it starts dividing. by a process called as cleavage, that is mitosis. It divides by mitosis, we call it as cleavage, and it forms a multicellular structure, and this multicellular structure is developing into a structure called as tadpole, that is the embryo stage of the frog. So the embryo stage of frog is called as the tadpole, and this tadpole is purely adapted to water. It is having gills, it is not having well developed jaws. There is a circular mouth and there is a tail, and by the help of this tail it will swim in the water, and by the help of the gills it will respire, and then in the further stages the tadpole, which is the embryo stage, it gets changed, transformed into young frog, so that we call it as metamorphosis. So in the metamorphosis there are physical, that means there are morphological and there are physiological, anatomical changes in the tadpole. So the morphological changes means there is absence of tail in the frog. The tadpole which is having the tail, that tail disappears, and the mouth which is circular, means which is not having well developed jaws, now the jaws are developed, and there are no limbs in the tadpole, so limbs are developed in the frog. So like that, morphological changes are taking place, anatomical changes also will take place. The gills get transformed into lungs, heart is well developed, and there are other systems well developed in the tadpole, and thus that is anatomical changes. Then physiological means functional changes. So the tadpole which was completely adapted to the aquatic system, now the tadpole which has get metamorphosed, or means which has undergone metamorphosis into frog, is adapted both to land and water. That is why there is also physiological change in the tadpole. So the tadpole undergoes various changes and thus get transformed into a frog, and it becomes an adult. So this is about the reproductive system of frog. So in this the main diagram which we have to that means we have to be perfect is the digestive system and the urinogenital system, that is male and female urinogenital system. The excretory system, the nervous system and respiratory system, so they are without diagrams, and just if we that means if we remember the information or the matter, that is enough. So this is about the life history of frog in the chapter structural organization in animals.